Thank you, Charlie, for your talk. The saying by Zen Master Sung-san that you were referring to is human beings have no meaning, no purpose, and no choice. And then he goes on to say, no meaning is great meaning, no purpose is great purpose, no choice is great choice. So if we say, this is the meaning of my life, we put blinders on. If we say, this is the purpose of my life, we put blinders on. If we say, this is how I choose, we put blinders on. So no meaning, no purpose, no choice means great meaning, great purpose, great choice. So thank you for bringing that up. Are there any questions? Yes, Kyle. And speak really loudly, and I'm going to repeat your question anyway.
In the Heart Sutra, towards the middle, you say no eyes, no ears, no nose.
Okay, so in the Heart Sutra, towards the middle, it says no eyes, no ears, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind.
And then no color, no sound, no taste.
Right.
And then no realm of eyes.
Okay, no color, no sound, no taste, and then no realm of eyes. And you want to know what that's about?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the Abhidharma is the perceptual psychology that sort of underscores Buddhism. So how do we perceive the world? How do we come up with our thoughts, our perceptions, our ideas? So that's the Abhidharma. So psychology doesn't mean like you go to a shrink and you tell about your problems. Psychology in this sense is perceptual psychology. And the Abhidharma, the great expositor of the Abhidharma was Shariputra. And it's very, very complicated. So we have these sense organs, no eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, mind. Mind perceives thoughts, right? So we have these sense organs, and then what do they sense? Well, eyes sense color. Any artist will tell you they don't sense line. None of you are outlined. They sense color, right? We have a wonderful artist in our midst here, Claire. So they sense color, right? And sound, ear, smell, sense sound, okay? But where does the color, where does the sound, where do all these things come from? That's the realm of eyes, the realm of, okay? So that's what's going on there. So that's the basics of the Abhidharma. And who was the great expositor? Shariputra. And who is the Heart Sutra addressed to? Shariputra. And what does it say? It says, no eyes, no ears, no nose. It says, forget the Abhidharma, okay? Emptiness is what's important. Put it all down. That's the Heart Sutra, okay? And the Heart Sutra, in fact, it goes on to negate the Four Noble Truths, right? No suffering, no origination of suffering, no stopping of suffering, and so on. So it's negating a lot of the early Buddhist theories, the early Buddhist concepts, and it's just negating them. It's saying, don't hang on to your ideas. Just what is it right now? And perceive this emptiness. Everything is originally emptiness. That's what it's saying. Okay? So thank you for your question. Are there any other questions?
I have a question.
Okay.
I always struggle with this, and since I'm participating in the Heart Kilche online, Kilche, it has just come up again. But you know, that balance between, okay, do I do more? Could I try harder? Am I really trying as hard as I could? With just saying, it is what it is. Don't check it. Don't, do any of that. And so on the one hand, I mean, that's the thing with the skill if you don't practice it. But on the other hand, you don't think about it. I don't know. It's just confusing, the difference between not checking your practice, not evaluating it, but also saying, like during the Heart Kilche, oh, how can I make it better? I don't know. Can you address that?
Yes. So, and that's a wonderful thing to address because a lot of people get stuck in that. So a very long time ago, a really long time ago, well over 40 years ago, when I started practicing in Cambridge, at the Cambridge Zen Center, and this would have been 1976, I'm old. And we would go down to Providence Zen Center because that was the sort of home temple of the North American, at that point it's the home temple of the entire school. And so people from Providence, from Cambridge would go down to Providence a lot, and we'd have these big meetings, big meetings of the Sangha, of all the people in the Northeast, or many of the people in the Northeast who were practicing. And we'd have these meetings, and people would get up and say, we should do more, we should do this, we should do that, and I'm going to do more, and you people are all lazy because you don't always come to morning practice, and on and on like that. Those people were gone in a year. Okay? So you have to know your situation. Your situation is not anyone else's situation. So what is your situation? What fits your life? And that's not a matter of checking. That's a matter of perception. Can you see? This is brown, right? It's like that. You just see, oh, this is my life. This is what I can do. And then you just do it completely without wondering, should I do more? Should I do less? You just do it completely. And maybe at some point you say, oh, I can do more. So then you do more. And then maybe at some point your life becomes complicated or something, and oh, I better do less. The important thing is to keep your practice going. That's the important thing. So at this Heart Kyolche, we have several people in the Sangha who are doing it, and at this Heart Kyolche, it begins, the opening ceremony, as people say, they make a practice pledge. And some people are like, I'm going to do 1,000 bows a day. Nobody actually said it, but you can imagine. I'm going to do 1,000 bows a day. And some people are, I'm going to sit for 5 more minutes every day. And that's all fine. And in fact, it's the people who say, I'm going to sit 5 more minutes of every day, those are the people I want to really cheer because they're new. They haven't established a steady practice. So that's really great. They're saying they're going to establish a steady practice. It doesn't matter if it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 100 minutes, 5 hours, But you need to commit to something that is doable. That's extremely important. You don't commit to something that you can't do, because then what's going to happen? You're not going to do it. So everybody commit to what they can do, and then when you make that commitment, you follow through. So that's what's important. So you can tell in your own life whether something actually is doable or whether it's not. And don't compare yourself to other people. Never compare yourself to other people. You just do exactly what it is that you said you're going to do, and you just do it completely. No need for second thoughts. Okay? Thank you. Yeah, that over-enthusiasm is a really big problem. I remember years ago there was somebody who, she was a personal friend, and she came by the Zen Center and she said, oh my God, this is amazing. I want you to pick me up every morning and drive me down here for morning practice. And this is when we had morning practice was 5 days a week. Actually, it was 6 days a week. But she only wanted to come on weekdays. And we would pick her up and we would take her down. And she did this for 2 weeks. That was the end of it. She, as my grandmother used to say, she'd bitten off more than she could chew. She'd done something that was very unrealistic, and then she never practiced again. So much better you practice less, but you continue to practice. That's what's important. So thank you. Are there any other questions? Yes.
So I'm really drawn to the Great Dharani.
Okay, you're drawn to the Great Dharani.
I think part of it is that there's no translation to
Part of it is because there's no translation.
How is there no translation to it? And also using it as mantra practice. Can you talk about?
Okay, so why is there no translation of the Great Dharani, and could I talk about mantra practice? So actually it's funny, I was telling somebody about this during an interview today. There's no translation of the Great Dharani because it's a mantra. And mantras are just syllables that are supposedly efficacious. You know, they're sort of from Sanskrit. So what, you have the Sanskrit and then it goes into the Chinese and then it goes into the Korean. So this is a double layer there. So it's the way Korean ears heard the way Chinese ears heard the Sanskrit, okay? So, so it's a long mantra, and so there's no translation because there's no meaning. But I should say that there are a couple of translations, a couple of things that claim they're translations, and one is by D.T. Suzuki, and you can probably find it online, and I have no idea what he thought he was doing. And then the other is actually a Hindu scholar of Buddhism in India, and he wrote a book, and I actually have it somewhere at home, but you can find it online, but I don't remember the title, so I can't tell you. And what he did is he looked at all the transcriptions, the Chinese, the Japanese, the Korean, I believe Vietnamese, Tibetan, and he tried to trace back, okay, if this one says the syllable wa, and this one says woo, and this one says whoa, this must be the Sanskrit syllable that lies behind. That's what he did. So he traced it back, and he produced this long book with a translation of it, which has a snake, which I like very much, because when I was starting to practice and I would chant the Great Dharani, and I would see a snake, a very large snake, moving, you know? So I thought that was cool. And he came to the decision that what the Great Dharani did was it was claiming that Avalokiteshvara was actually this double-headed Hindu god, Harihara. Okay. And if you believe that, there's a bridge across the Kansas River, which I will be happy to sell to anybody. So yeah, it's really fascinating how people talk themselves, like my grandfather believed that all languages were descended from Hebrew. And he knew a lot of languages. He was a brilliant man. And he would explain, you know, how all languages descended from Hebrew. Of course they don't. It's amazing how people can do that. So anyway, but yeah, the Great Dharani has no meaning. There is something called the Great Dharani Sutra, which sort of riffs off the Chinese characters that are used to transcribe the sounds. So you'll have a Chinese character that means, I don't know, maybe tree. And what it's doing is transcribing the sound from the Sanskrit. And the sound from the Sanskrit doesn't mean tree, and nobody claims. But anyway, it sort of riffs off that. And it's interesting. And you can find that online too. But yeah, so the thing about mantras is they have no meaning, this kind of frontal lobe meaning, and that makes them very efficacious. So there's one school of thought that believes that all of these syllables in themselves have really magic powers. And I'm not going to put that down, maybe it's true, you know. But simply the fact that we are chanting these things and we can't say, oh, wow, that's really cool, what it says there, or I don't know if I agree with that, you know, or gosh, I wonder where this comes from. Like, you know, your question about no eyes, no ears, no nose, no tongue, wonder where this comes from. There's nothing to hold on to. You know, it's just pure chanting. There's nothing for your frontal lobes to grab and analyze and think about and like or dislike. What are you going to say? I like the syllable wa and I don't like the syllable woo. Maybe you do, but that, you know, it's really silly. So yeah, so chanting is what? Chanting is about breath and it's about sound. And chanting practice bypasses all this stuff. Chanting practice just bypasses it. And that's why chanting practice is so wonderful. Also, in the Zen Center, chanting practice is together. You know, chanting on your own is wonderful. That's its own kind of wonderful. And chanting together is another kind of wonderful. Because this energy, we're making this energy together. And when we do a keto, a chanting retreat, so the ketos we've done here, they've only been a few hours, and we always have to find a place in the country to do them so we don't disturb the neighbors, because we have, we have all these musical instruments and stuff. But when we do a keto, if you do a real keto, which is a retreat that lasts at least as long as this retreat, you'll have a 2-day keto or a 3-day keto or a 5-day keto or whatever. When you do the keto together, it's almost like the energy in the room, you could almost see it like swirling in the middle of the room. It's really extraordinary because everybody's together. And hours and hours and hours of chanting, all your inner monologue just sort of disappears. It's just gone. You just can't do it. You're just too absorbed in this activity. And chanting is really wonderful. It's very, very powerful. Chanting, bowing, these arduous physical practices are very, very wonderful. Exactly because this frontal lobe stuff doesn't have a chance to hold on to anything. So, thank you. Are there any other questions? Yes, Eileen. Whoops, you're muted. You are muted. We still can't hear you. Do you want to put it in the chat? We still can't hear you. Okay. All right. While Eileen's doing whatever she's doing, hopefully putting it in the chat, are there any other questions people would like to ask? Yes.
So we've been talking a lot about not making distinctions to hold on to.
Yeah, we talk about not making distinctions to hold on to.
And I've noticed in our chants, we talk specifically a lot about Shakyamuni, but there are other Buddhas mentioned.
Yeah, we talk about Shakyamuni, there are other Buddhas, right?
Like Vairocana.
Vairocana.
Yeah, thank you. Amita, are there any significant differences that we should be considering while doing practice, or is this is it all kind of pointing towards the same thing?
So are there significant differences that we should be thinking about, or are they all pointing towards the same thing? Everything's pointing towards the same thing. Okay, just that's a given. But it's fun to know who these beings are. So Vairocana, we chant a lot to Vairocana and to Amida Buddha in the morning bell chant. They're very different. So Vairocana is the cosmic Buddha. It's the Buddha who imbues every bit of space and time. And the morning bell chant, in the morning bell chant, when you hear Biro, that's the Vaira part. When you hear Sana, that's the Chana part. It never says Vairocana, it either says Biro or Sana. And so they have this this phrase where Vairocana has no fixed home, something like that. So instead of having this image of the static being that imbues everything, it's more like this liquid, moving being, no fixed home, everywhere, all at once, And so that's Vairocana. And Vairocana is the Buddha behind the Avatamsaka Sutra. He's the Buddha that everybody else in the Avatamsaka Sutra, mostly bodhisattvas, but also Shakyamuni Buddha in 1 or 2 chapters, speaks. And when they're speaking, they're really speaking, they're speaking from Vairocana. So that's Vairocana. And then Amida Buddha is very different. So Vairocana is very abstract. In fact, sometimes people say, Vairocana is so abstract, I can't relate to Vairocana. That's fine. Vairocana doesn't care if we relate to him or not. And I don't even know what it means to say Vairocana exists, but it's a wonderful metaphor. It's a wonderful way of thinking of things. So Amida Buddha is the opposite, because Amida Buddha is the one who has a great vow to save all beings. And so Amida Buddha has the Western Pure Land. And I always say the Western Pure Land is west of the universe. It's not like west of Lawrence, Kansas. It's west of the universe. So in Buddhism, there are these pure lands. And the great bodhisattvas, you become a great bodhisattva, and then you get your own pure land. And your Pure Land is where, you create this world of, deep practice for other beings. And so the Western Pure Land is the one you want to be reborn into because practice is very efficacious there. It's not like you want to be born because, the streets are made of gold and the clouds are made of pearls and there's beautiful harp music playing and you're happy all the time. And boy, your game of golf just got a lot better. No, this is the whole point of the Western Pure Land. You want to be reborn into it because then it's very efficacious practice space. Everybody there is practicing. You can't even say really hard because it's just like this effortless, complete 100% practice all the time. And of course, in Buddhism, nothing is forever. So eventually you pop out of the Western Pure Land and you're a bodhisattva or something, So that's the Western Pure Land. So that Amida is the Buddha of the Western Pure Land. And so he's taken this great vow to help all beings attain enlightenment. And there are lots and lots and lots of other Buddhas, many, many Buddhas, thousands probably. There's Medicine Buddha, I don't know, there's tons of Buddhas, but yeah. And of course there's Shakyamuni Buddha, our Buddha, okay, the Buddha of planet Earth. Thank you. When you asked, should we think about that? And it's up to you. It's fun. It's fun to know what these are talking about. And these are all metaphors. These are all metaphors. Vairocana is sort of a metaphor of emptiness in some sense. And Amida Buddha is a metaphor for direction. And not just for me, not just my direction, but all beings' direction. So these are wonderful metaphors. Okay, Eileen, you're going to try again.
Battery problem.
Good.
In the teaching, we're always told when it's time to think, think. When you don't need to think, just stay in the moment. I'm finding that when it's time to think, sometimes my mind does not want to think. And the manifestation of that is that it's getting harder to retrieve information. It seems to recede somewhere into a deeper layer. Part of it may very well be not having used it for some time because of COVID, not doing very much. But part of it, I feel, is just a certain reluctance to do what I need to do, which is think when it's time to think. So I'm a little bit concerned about that because I used to have a friend who was a business person, he's deceased now, who described exactly this problem. And at that time, I didn't really get what he meant because I didn't have any problems at that time. I just wondered if you had any thoughts on this.
Well, my first thought, which you don't have to answer, is to ask how old you are. Because our mind starts doing certain things as we get older. Even without dementia, it becomes more difficult to bring certain things up to memory. But this idea of being in the moment, it's a very interesting idea because this moment is actually infinite in time and space. So there's this sort of, be here now. And as if like each moment is like a little dot in the fabric of space-time, a little four-dimensional dot. And then you bounce to the next dot, and then you bounce to the next dot. But each moment already contains everything the universe has been and everything the universe will be. And I'm not talking about like, causality, because there's lots of randomness going around. But it's just, you can't separate. It's just, wow. So yeah, when thinking time, you think to the best of your abilities. And sometimes sometimes, like I really, really, really want to play the Bach Goldberg variations well. I mean, this will be my last accomplishment of my life, be to play the Goldberg variations well. I hope. And I find myself like, I'll do all kinds of things. I'll do Wordle, I'll do connections. These are New York Times puzzles. I'll check my Facebook. I'll read every single line in the newspaper except for the sports pages, including things like, what the budget is for the sanitation department. I mean, I'll do anything before the one thing I really want to do, which is play the piano or practice the piano, So our minds do that. It's amazing. It's amazing. It's like we just shoot ourselves in the foot constantly. We trip ourselves up constantly. So we watch this mind. It's just very interesting. So yeah, if you have something you have to do and involves a lot of thinking, just do it. And if you're not doing it, then don't do it. It's how it goes. Yeah. Jane Gnoyak had, one of the members of our Sangha, has this wonderful, wonderful story she tells. One of her sons is a very serious classical musician, and he has a PhD, and he works in orchestras and things like that. And I forget his instrument. Was it clarinet, I think? Anyway, when he was in high school, and he would practice every day. Every day he'd practice for 2 hours, 3 hours after school. And Jane, who herself, she was a voice major. I mean, she understands about music and what you have to do. And she said to him, "Don't you ever get tired of doing that?" And he said, "Oh, all the time, but I got to go practice." So that mind, that's a good mind for a Zen practice too. Don't you get tired? Yep, but got to go practice. So thank you for your question. Let's see, what time is it? I guess we have time for another question or two if there are any.
Well, I do have another question, but
Okay.
if somebody else has one, that's fine. But the idea of sentient and insentient beings.
Oh, yes.
We categorize them that way in Buddhism. And I read an article about a woman who has parrots or birds. I don't know if they're parrots, cockatoos maybe. That's not a parrot, but some birds. And she's actually teaching them to spell words. They'll put chalk in their beaks and write, and on an iPad. They interact on an iPad. They're even doing video conferencing between two macaws that never saw any other macaws, and they will do this, whatever they need to do to say, "I'd like to make a call to my friend," thing. And so, when you look at the bird brain idea that birds aren't supposed to be intelligent, yet she's finding that they are far more intelligent than anybody thought. So you would put them as an insentient being. So this, in Buddhism, this idea of sentient and insentient, it's just,
It's actually a bad translation.
Okay.
So every single English translation of the first of the 4 great vows starts out, sentient beings are, and then it's usually numberless or something. But the actual Chinese is the many beings. So in Chinese, one way of doing a plural is being, many feet, or foot, something like that. So it begins being. So the many beings are numberless. So Buddhism does not make that distinction, actually, but we do. And as far as birds go, I think it was the New York Times that just had an article, it was the New York Times or the New Yorker, about how they've discovered this kind of structure in a bird's brain that it's different. It's like sort of parallel planes or something, instead of like the way our brains work with things going from one point to another. I don't know the details because, it's a pop science article, but in fact, they're discovering that birds have incredibly complicated brains. They're tiny, tiny brains, but they're incredibly complicated. And yeah, crows can do all kinds of things. So yeah, I mean, this is sentient. Maybe, you know. So the notion, it's like life and death. You try to make these distinctions. Like, let's take life and death. So tardigrades, these little tiny microscopic, they look like little tiny bears. They're called water bears, but they're microscopic. And if they don't have any water, they shrivel up. And they're like a piece of dust. And they can be that way for decades, longer, I don't know. And then you get a little drop of water, and then boom, they're back. So, you see the tardigrade, it's like a piece of dust. Well, you don't see it because it's like a piece of dust. You put it in your little pan, you put it in the garbage, it goes into an incinerator somewhere, goodbye tardigrade. You leave it alone, outside, it rains, boom, it's back. So where's the line between life and death? What about a virus? Is a virus alive or is it not alive? You can argue this all the time. Well, it has these aspects of life. It's, what is it, RNA but not DNA? I mean, something, it's like, so we make these distinctions, sentient, insentient. At what point? I mean, bacteria have reactions. They move towards light, they move away from light. Is this sentience? So how do you define these things? So this is all the boundaries. At the boundaries, everything disappears. So there's no point in holding on to them. It's like you have bright red, and then at the boundaries, it goes into like maybe purple, and another boundary, it goes maybe towards brown. Claire, am I doing the art right? Okay. So yeah, so we make these, you make these categories and we think that they're nicely defined. They're not. Okay? So thank you. Are there any other questions? Okay, so thank you, everybody. We can stop recording.